Today on The State of Us, is the United States in a recession? It's tricky. Economic output is down, but the job market is strong. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal, and the senior historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. If the U.S. is in a recession, it's a very strange one, according to the Wall Street Journal. The U.S. economy has experienced 12 recessions since World War II, and each one included two features: economic output contracted and employment rose. Today, something highly unusual is happening. Economic output fell in the first quarter, and signs suggest it did so again in the second. Yet the job market showed little sign of faltering during the first half of the year. The jobless rate actually fell from 4% last December to 3.6% in May. Strange. So, are we in a recession? And if so, what does that mean for what's on the horizon? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we dive in, Lance, do we have a word of the day?
We do. It's a pretty basic one, but it's going to give you a chance to win.
Oh, boy.
Because it's 4 syllables and it's going to be easy to use in today's show. The word is anomaly. A-N-O-M-A-L-Y. A noun. Departure from the regular arrangement, the general rule, or usual method.
So in other words, we are experiencing an anomaly if this is a recession.
These numbers are an anomaly for a recession since World War II, right? I mean, I think this is the article. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it stated that there have been 12.
Yes, 12 recessions
since the 1950s.
Since World War II,
since the end of World War II,
mm-hmm.
And what is going on right now does not fit that framework.
Well, Lance chose anomaly for the word of the day, but that's eerily in that ballpark of his favorite word that the mainstream media uses all the time, which is unprecedented.
Yes, it is.
Unprecedented. That's how you know they're serious, Lance, is when they tell you that it is unprecedented.
And that's how you know that they're usually under the age of 50, because they've never, or their writers are under the age of 50. Because it's like, it's never been like this in my lifetime, so it's unprecedented. Okay, study history.
I think we need to define unprecedented at some point for folks. See if we can figure that out. So basically what we're doing today is breaking this down into 3 parts. We're going to talk about what indicates a recession, right? I mean, how do we decide there is a recession? Because if we're saying there might be one, are we in one already?
Because everybody's throwing that term around, right?
Recession. So, what does that mean?
So, we all say, yeah, we know what that is. Well, do we? I mean, how is it technically or economically defined? And are we there? Are we in that situation?
Yes.
Or is this just what the news media is throwing around because it's the story of the week or the month?
So we'll talk about the indicators of recession. We'll also look ahead and kind of view what our economists telling us about what to expect coming up, and then also discuss the new risks, things that are playing into the unusual nature of what's going on. So just for everybody, in case you were wondering, who gets to decide if we have a recession? Well, it's the National Bureau of Economic Research. That's who makes that determination. They said that the first recession in the U.S. Was in 1857. That's the first one on record.
Unprecedented. At that point, it was unprecedented because it was the first one.
One popular rule of thumb is that the economy is in a recession when gross domestic product, which is a measure of the nation's output of goods and services, contracts for 2 consecutive quarters. But that's not the way that NBER sees it. Again, that's the National Bureau of Economic Research. They have 8 members on this, and the committee looks at basically a range of monthly and quarterly indicators, including output income, manufacturing activity, business sales, and perhaps most important, because this is the one that we're going to talk about a good bit, employment levels. And then it makes a judgment call. The committee says, quote, a recession is a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, normally visible in production, employment, and other indicators.
Catchphrase, other indicators.
Yes. Yeah, there's your, and whatever else we think might go into it.
But what's not an anomaly, according to the article, is that most of the time we are already in the recession before it has been called. And sometimes we've been in it and are out of it by the time it's been so named.
Yes.
The article talks about that as well. So maybe that's why everybody's talking about it, because then they can say, see, I was telling you we were in a recession. And if we're not, then it was like, well, we just won't talk about it and you'll forget that I was saying that we weren't.
Right. But if I was right, I'll be sure to point out. But
many times, right? I mean, I think the article points out that we don't really know or realize we're in a recession until after we're already there. Because to define it, it's a collection of data as to what has been happening, not what is happening currently. So to put the brakes on it a little bit for me is we need everybody to stop talking about being in a recession, because you don't know until you're in it for a while.
Well, it's like the whole stock market thing we've talked about, right? Where people, the economy is bad. So what do? They start selling stocks, and then what happens? Well, then the stock market, goes through a decline. So there is that, chicken and egg sort of thing that you have to be careful of. If everybody starts thinking we're in a recession and starts behaving that way, then we may enter a recession simply because we willed it into existence.
Right. Because so don't listen. Go about your life like you normally would, folks.
The one common denominator, though, because this is where we look at what does history tell us, right, to date about recessions? Well, the one common thing has been jobs. The unemployment rate has increased every time by as little as 1.9 percentage points in 1960 and 1961, and as much as 11.2 percentage points in 2020. So what we know is that every time that there has been a recession, right, the unemployment rate goes up, right? More people are out of work.
Makes sense, because it goes hand in hand with not producing as much. So if not as many people are working, you're not producing as much, i.e. you fit the definition of a recession. Yeah. Because you don't have as many people out there working, producing the goods that are counted towards all of the production in the country and the buying and the selling. But in this case, we're not, right? Because you just read as the opening of the show, unemployment has actually dropped.
Yes.
In the last year. Unemployment has not gone up. Unemployment has actually gone down.
Part of watching jobs is monthly business payroll. And that's also fallen in every recession by about 3%. Yet between December and May of this year, payrolls rose 2.4 million or 1.6%. They are a coincident indicator, meaning they tend to rise and fall in sync with broad economic activity.
So one of the major components of a recession
is not present.
Is a raise in unemployment and not as much money being earned. And neither one of those things are going on right now.
Neither one are true.
And again, it doesn't mean we're not in a recession or we're not going to have one, but it's an interesting parallel when you look at, it's an interesting anomaly when you look at historically what happens in a recession, that this major piece is not occurring, right?
Right. The other funky thing, right, is the scarcity of labor. And this is another anomaly. Because generally, right, when we think of recessions, like think back to 2008 and 2009, because most people listening to this show, right, they're probably familiar, can remember that. A big factor.
It's not unprecedented for them.
No, it's not unprecedented.
They remember that, right.
There were a lot of people out of work, right, and the unemployment rate goes up 10%-ish, or up to 10%. And there were a lot of people who were looking for jobs, who could not get a job even if they wanted one. But we're kind of in the opposite situation. The size of the labor force at 164.4 million in May was still slightly smaller than the 164.6 million people who were working or looking for work right before the pandemic. So even when people do lose work, there have been many unfilled positions available. And you and I have covered this, I don't know how many times now, Lance, but we did a whole show devoted to the fact that there are more available jobs than there are people available to fill the jobs who are part of the workforce.
I think what's the key there, though, the interesting piece that's new to me and to maybe to some of our audience is the point that we still aren't as employed post-pandemic as we were pre-pandemic.
Right.
We're still slightly fewer people employed now than there were before the pandemic. That's new information to me. So it's like, there's still room for growth, right? I mean, it would seem like there's still room for growth that we haven't, and the job market shows that, right? You can look at almost any business or store, whatever you want to, and they're looking for workers, right? Factories. I mean, I know around here in the Midwest where we are, I can't drive through any town of any size without seeing a number of job opportunities.
Well, part of the problem that they attribute this to is, like everything else that's wrong in the world, right? The baby boomers. That's who you blame when you got to blame somebody.
Okay, well, we got broad shoulders.
We go to that generation. But really what it is, or part of what they attribute it to, is a lot of baby boomers used the pandemic as sort of the straw that broke the camel's back and said, we're done. We're retiring. We're leaving the labor force. At the same time, because of the government stimulus, right, that went on, and because of aggressive measures to cap what only ended up, by the way, being a 2-month recession, which is the shortest one on record since the end of World War II as well. Shortest one on record. That all spurred a surge in demand, right? People are at home. People have money in their pocket because of what the government did. And so what are they going to do? Well, they're going to buy things, And so demand goes up while you forced a whole bunch of people, right, out of their jobs. So what happened to supply? Well, it plummeted, which only further aggravated demand. Because we also know that as things become more scarce, what happens? People want those things more, even if they don't need them, right? So, well, now I got to have it because nobody can get it. So I got to get it,
Remember the great toilet paper run?
Yes. Yeah.
The early pandemic.
Right. Totally not necessary, but nevertheless, here we are out of toilet paper because a whole bunch of people freaked out and bought, boatloads of toilet paper. So, that is it. That is an illustration, right, of this weird thing that's going on too. If you have people that left the workforce altogether, but they didn't. It's not like they died, right? I mean, a lot of these people, they retired, but now you have the Lances of the world out there who they still want to have a good time. They still want to have a good life. They're in retirement. They're maybe working on their home, right? They're maybe traveling. So what are they doing? Well, they're contributing to demand, but they no longer contribute to supply. So what does that tell us about what's next, looking ahead? We're going to listen to some economists here and see what they have to say. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. The Wall Street Journal tells us that even the most pessimistic economists see a modest jobs downturn in the months ahead. About 2 in 5 economists surveyed by the Wall Street Journal in June said that they saw at least a 50-50 chance that the U.S. enters recession in the coming year. But among them, few saw a big increase in the jobless rate. They forecast a 3.9% unemployment rate at the end of this year and a 4.6% unemployment rate at the end of 2023. The U.S. has, now here's your unprecedented, right? The U.S. has never had a recession in the post-World War II era with a jobless rate that low. So if we went into a recession, right, under those circumstances that these economists are predicting, it would be an anomaly.
I just want to point out that we have some of our favorite numbers here on this show.
Yeah.
Because you said 2 out of 5 economists. That's our lovely 40%.
Yes.
So
40%.
40% of economists say there's a 50-50 chance.
40% of economists say it's a coin flip.
Oh, God.
Isn't that great?
Let me be a weather forecaster. You know what, folks? The sun might come out today. It might be cloudy. It might rain. It might be hot. It might be cold. It's about a 40% chance for all of that. So plan your day accordingly. All right.
Sorry.
Put
be ready
on,
for anything.
Carry your umbrella, but also put on your suntan lotion to protect you from the UV rays that may come out when it's not raining, if it does rain. And you know what? There's a 40% chance the wind might blow. So that's your local forecast here from True Chat News.
You went into the wrong field.
I mean, well, because you can say anything. And it's like, if it didn't happen, you're like, look, the day was better than what we saw. Aren't we all grateful? And if it happens, you say, look, I predicted that. No, you didn't. You just filled up a minute of airtime. Anyway.
Are you saying that economists don't have any value, Lance? 40%, is that what you're telling me?
You made it sound like there was something important going on there. 40% of economists said there's a 50-50 chance. Okay. All right. I think I just want to point out the main point of what you just said was we've never seen a recession with these kind of employment numbers. And that's so, if this recession happens, right, it would be an anomaly.
Yes.
Because we've never seen a recession with these kind of work numbers. That's the key point.
Yes, that's the thing that I think is important to take away. The other thing that I think we have to spend just a minute talking about there is the fact that unemployment could remain so low and still enter a recession. What would that mean is going on, right? What does that say? Because that to me is a big, not that a recession is not important, but I think that speaks to the state of what's going on in the country.
Well, we're obviously dropping in production, right? It's that caveat of, and all those other things. We would see it. We obviously are seeing a drop in production because we don't have as many people working. So that would be one of the boxes that you'd check for a recession. And so then you have the supply chain issue. That would be a box that you could check. You also have inflation because people, even if they're not working, as you pointed out, some of us have money
and are buying things.
And so that's putting pressure on the supply chain and the people buying things. So obviously prices go up, inflation then occurs, which puts pressure on the economy. And then, the one that everybody stopped talking about, they're still fighting over in Russia. Russia and Ukraine are still fighting.
Still a major world conflict underway.
Major world conflict taking place that you probably have to search for on your local and even national media anymore, but not here on the State of Us. We talk about it about every other week. By the way, we're about due to talk about it again.
Spoiler alert, people.
But it's affecting,
coming.
But it's affecting, natural gas prices and the turning to coal. And here we are in the middle of a heat wave, and countries in Europe, because of the war in Ukraine, are worried about how they're going to stay warm in the winter. And they're dying across Europe because of the heat currently, because there's not enough energy to keep them cool. So a lot of other variables, right? Other than just employment. When you start
and other than just what's happening in our country.
The pressure on the economy, right?
Yeah. Because those other things have impacts on us, even if it's not specifically something we need, there's that interconnected, interwoven component of the rest of the world.
Well, we've seen one of our major allies lose power and lose their position.
Yes.
The leader of Great Britain is just stepped down. Boris Johnson, a strong supporter
of
U.S. and policies, just said, nobody seems to like what's going on under my administration, so I'm stepping aside for there to be a new election here.
And somebody else give it a try.
Yeah, somebody else try to do a better job than me.
Yep.
So when we say there are issues among even our strongest allies and supporters to the point that they're losing their positions of power.
Yeah. I think part of what it highlights too is what the State of Us, here's one of those times, right, where we can harken back and say, hey, you remember what we were talking about before the pandemic? Do you remember? Labor shortage, right? We were talking about labor shortage. And it is an interesting thing that we've not seen with previous recessions, if, again, this turns out to be a recession, which is this idea that productivity can be at an all-time high, right? The per worker productivity is as great as it's ever been greater than it's ever been. There are terribly low unemployment rate, right? I mean, basically, if you want a job, there's a job. That's what it boils down to. You can go work. Part of what I'm concerned about is I think there's an unpredictability, or there's always an unpredictability, but there's an instability to how people feel today. And I think I don't know, maybe an economist can tell us how we would measure that, but I think it's something that's so important for us to keep in mind because it's not mentioned anywhere in this article. But because the job market's so volatile and because the workers have all this authority, right, to try to find the best job, what happens is a lot of job hopping, right? Because while I'm doing this job, but here's this better job. So I'm going to go over here to this job, and then I'm going to go over here to this job. And it's bad in two different ways, right? It's good because hopefully these people are getting better jobs, getting more pay. Those are positive things. Those are not bad things. They're getting a job they like better. Hopefully all of those things are true. The downside to that, though, for the individual and the business is that lack of consistency, lack of predictability, which, by the way, further exacerbates the supply chain issues. And you say, what do you mean? Well, keep in mind that we've talked about many times, it is almost always cheaper for a company to retain a worker than it is to go out and hire a new one. It's not like, well, Lance left today and we hired somebody tomorrow, so there's no disruption. No, because the person we hired just is not going to be. Most likely the productivity is not up to what your old employee was doing. They just don't know how it's done yet. Well, to your point, this in my lifetime is an anomaly, and that is businesses are closing when the sign on their door says they should be open because they can't find enough workers. I have never seen that in my lifetime. I mean, stores, stores always have, set hours, but I've walked into, one a week. I go up to a store where, I think I'll, browse and do some shopping, or I want to pick something up here. And they're in business, right? They're open. I just checked on my phone that, well, actually my wife's phone, not on my phone, but your phone doesn't do that. Their business hours are such and so. Okay. Well, we're within those time frames, and we go up and the door's locked and the lights are out. Yep. And it's like, well, wait a minute, there's supposed to be open. They don't have anybody to work. So I understand that, I'm frustrated as a consumer, but they just lost money from me. And it's not that they don't want to be open. It's that they don't have enough people working to stay open the hours that they want to do business. What are the new risks? We've talked a lot about what are recession indicators. We've also looked at looking ahead, what are economists saying is likely, what's unique about our situation. But what are some of the new risks, some of the other risks? There are 4. We're going to talk about those. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Four new risks that further complicate what we've already talked about, the unique situation. First up is that inventory cutting is leading to wider business retrenchment that feeds on itself, which happened in past recessions. So this is a recent problem, although this is not an anomaly because this actually did happen in other recessions, right? Which is this idea that businesses have a certain amount of inventory. One way to cut cost is maintain less inventory. And that way you're only selling what you can sell quickly. Of course, the problem then is that demand is not always predictable. And as it's been very volatile here, especially in the past couple of years, that then leads to a lot of what we've seen where when there is a supply chain issue, then they want to order more stuff, but there's no stuff to order and they don't have any back supply. So there's no cushion there to allow for that ebb and flow. Even before the pandemic, and it was exacerbated by the pandemic as well, there was a push to closing the brick and mortar stores and to order online. I've been to 2 different chain stores this week looking for an item. And just last night, my wife said, you know what?
they just don't carry it. We'll just go home and order it online. So whether that's because, they're not stocking as much stuff, or it's a supply chain issue, or they can't get it, or whatever the reason, they're almost forcing our hands in some ways to just go ahead and just stay home and order it online, because it's not worth getting out and taking the ride to buy it in the store because they're not carrying it. To your point, whatever the reason, whether it's supply chain, whether it's the fact that they're not carrying as much inventory because they don't want to take up the floor space, they want a quick turnover with the product so that they can increase their profit margin for their shareholders. Whatever the reason, we've talked about that for a couple of years. Would we see a carryover of ordering online? And just anecdotally, I see more UPS and FedEx and Amazon trucks in my neighborhood than I saw during the pandemic. So, because it's almost like I want to go, I like to shop at the brick and mortar store. I like to look at what I'm getting before I get it. I don't want to get it and say, oh, this is what I want, send it back. I'd rather just get it, go home. Even if I have to pay a little bit more for it and I'm inconvenienced because I have to leave my home, I'd rather go get it and have it. And I'm not able to your point. It's not in the stores.
The other thing, let's talk about the next one, is the uncertainty in the home building market.
And see, this is always a key economic multiplier. This is something I've always taught in my history class when we talked a little bit about economics. One of the key signs of the economy is new homes.
Because most post-World War II recessions have been associated with declines in residential home construction. And new home construction dropped 14% in May from a month earlier, seasonally adjusted. And that drag, if it persists as the Fed raises short-term interest rates, because home building is highly sensitive to interest rate, highly sensitive. It's one of those very finicky, as the interest rate starts to go up, one of the first things you're going to see is that the new housing construction plummets because, whether it's either individuals who are going out or businesses and investment groups who are going out, a lot of their returns are generally based off of affordable interest rates. And if interest rates start to go up, even by 1 or 2%, what you're talking about in terms of how long your return will take or whether or not you'll get the return that you wanted at all of a sudden, all that math changes. And it's like, well, it may not be worth it.
If you're a single homeowner, that small rise in the interest rate increases your monthly payment. And if you're building a massive group of homes, then you have to raise your rental rates when you get done, to your point, to get your return. And have you just priced yourself out of the market? Because you probably did your homework and thought, well, this market can handle these prices. But if you increase the interest rate from which you have to borrow, then you have to raise your rental prices on all your new homes that you build, because that's another thing, right? That we've seen people building homes to rent them. Companies aren't building homes for that single owner. They want to maintain control of the home and just rent it out because they think they can make more money that way.
The next thing is interesting as well, because the chief economist at JP Morgan is predicting a bend but don't break scenario for the economy. That means a sharp slowdown in activity that doesn't crack the job market. He explained that though corporate profits are slowing, corporate profit margins are exceptionally high historically. They're sitting at around 18% of sales during the past year. After-tax profits have rarely been higher since post-World War II. And that's not just recessions, that's just ever.
So he's saying companies are making money as much as they've ever had.
Well, so their total profits, the gross profit, right, is down. But the margin, in other words, how much above what they're spending are they making, is greater.
So they're doing a good job of running their business.
They're getting a good return on what they are spending.
I gotcha.
I was gonna say, that's a fairly broad statement to say they're doing. I mean, they're doing well if the measure is how high can we push the profit margin, right?
Is the counter to that though, they've tightened their belts so much that there's no more belt tightening to be done?
Well,
so that when something major does occur, they don't have anywhere else to go to cut costs to keep the profit margin high?
that's part of where, though, it's interesting because the other thing that he points out is that firms have a large cash cushion. Their total profits are not as much, but what they're making on what they're spending is greater, and they're setting more and more of that aside into cash.
But that in turn hurts the economy because they're not investing. So
It's not being spent.
So yes, because they're not investing, they're not quote spending it, then the economy is continuing to contract rather than to expand.
And we can't just blame businesses. We got to blame the boomers too. Households, and this is the last reason here, households are flush with cash as well.
Why is it just boomers who have money?
At the end of the first quarter,
I don't understand that.
they had, so get this, right? Businesses are sitting on $4 trillion of cash. At the end of the first quarter of this year, households had $18.5 trillion in checking accounts,
Okay,
savings
but that's just not
accounts,
boomers, all right?
and
Come
money
on.
markets.
You're being facetious because
Well, I'm just saying they're the
You keep
big
telling
share
me-
of that. They're just sitting on that money.
You do not have proof of that, and you're the first one to tell me that we're not as important and powerful as we used to be. That our numbers are declining. That we're not even the biggest generation
So
anymore.
we can't have our cake and eat it too.
So exactly, you cannot say that we're not as effective and as important as we used to be, and then when there's a problem,
Blame the
just
boomers.
blame us. Wait a minute. We're one of the smallest generation groups now in existence, according to Justin on this show.
That's right.
So how can we be blamed for every problem?
Baby boomers get blamed because of the alliteration. I think that's what it is. Also, in fairness, the data does tell us that the share of household wealth by generation, even though there are not as many boomers anymore as there are millennials, and that's because they've died off, because they're getting older, but the percentage of household wealth is still held higher per boomer than it is per millennial.
Well, that's because we've been working longer.
Yeah, well,
We should have more.
okay. So, but then you guys gotta let loose of some of that. Apparently, go spend it.
Well, you got to make something I want.
But the other problem is, and this is a business and individual thing, right? That people have to keep in mind. It's not just as simple as releasing that cash because we already have strong demand, and so releasing, and this is part of why I think both people and especially businesses, though, are struggling with, and sometimes we would like to spend the money, but I can't go buy anything. There was a story the other day about how General Motors has thousands of cars sitting outside its plants that are 99.9% done, but they can't push them out to dealership lots because what are they missing? Semiconductors. So they are making the cars and they're parking them and saying, there's people that want to buy them and we could sell them, but they don't have the computer in it, because we don't have this one thing that we need to finish it. We can't finish.
Well, and then here's the other psychological effect, and I speak as a boomer this time. When you are getting paid once a month and you see and hear all this on the news on the economy and it's negative,
You get nervous.
you worry, do I have enough to make it until the end of my life? And so then what do? If you're not out hustling for more money, like I am, then you have to cut your expenses because you start to worry, will my money go far enough to take care of me so that I'm not eating, oatmeal 3 times a day? And I love my oatmeal. Don't get me wrong. I love my oatmeal, but I don't want to have to eat it at every meal. So then we tend to hold on to that money when the economy is bad because we're not sure that it will last as long as we need it to last.
I guess the way I would sum it up, Lance, right, is that there are a lot of anomalies to what's going on, but there are also some indicators that are traditional recession indicators.
That's why I'm going to go with the learned economist, and I think they're 40% of us agree that there's a 50-50 chance that we could have a recession.
That's the conclusion of today's episode. Well, I'm really glad that we had this conversation, Lance. I think that really clears it up for people because now they'll feel very confident about how to proceed. So why do we have this conversation today other than to just annoy our listeners with our 40% of economists who say there's a coin flip chance of what's going to happen?
I'm not telling them that. I just am being facetious as all get out. I think the economy is better than what people want it to be. And because people are looking for reasons for it to be bad, they're naturally pessimistic.
They're finding the bad.
That we're finding the bad and finding the negativity, and we're not looking at the optimistic side. And that is, there are plenty of jobs out there. Yes, inflation is there, but we've also seen salaries go up, and they haven't gone up like inflation went up, but that was all part of it, right? When salaries increase, prices increase. But we have this conversation so that you can get those words of wisdom that I just shared. And if I'm wrong, I probably won't be around very long for you to yell at me because, I'm a boomer.
So it doesn't matter anyway. It's just the boomer talking again.
But we have that mission here at True Chat, and that is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done that today, talking about the economy. Justin hasn't told you, but I'm telling you that I don't think it's going to be as bad as what the doomsdayers are saying is going to be. And hopefully you've enjoyed the show. Share it with your family and friends, and tell them as a podcast, they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found. And the more of you listen, the more money that your boomer has that he can then go out and spend to help the economy for you younger people.
There you have it. That's what you need to know. Also, you need to know that the State of Us releases new podcasts Tuesdays and Thursdays each week, first thing in the morning. Those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States. So be sure to check your local station, see if they have it. And if not, maybe you should call them up and say, hey, we'd like for you to carry this. We think that'd be smart. We'd appreciate that. So who do you have for the win today, Lance, on the
you went all out on Anomaly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
all right. Well, as you predicted.
Oh,
right?
Yeah,
there was more than a 40% chance.
It was a word that Justin could easily, one, understand, and two, fit into the show.
That's the first big thing, is understand the word. The second big thing is my ability to say the word.
Right. The only thing going against Justin was that it was a 4-syllable word, but it's a word that he's used in his life, so it was easy for him to put it into his vernacular today.
Existing part of vocabulary.
Yeah,
so
I had you at an 85% chance.
An 85% chance. Wow. Well, he tells us that at the end of the show, folks. Notice there.
Well, I wasn't playing with the full heart because I knew I'd get blamed. If the economy's bad, it's got to be the boomers.
When in doubt, blame the baby boomers.
If it's hot outside, it's the boomers. If it's too cold,
they
it's
caused
the
climate change,
and
and that affects both the heat and the cold. So, and the economy and the wages.
When we all die, guess what?
All
these younger generations that have been created, they'll be pointing their fingers at the millennials.
That's right.
Because you didn't do enough. You didn't save enough.
Yep.
You didn't work hard enough.
Yep.
So that's okay. I won't be around to see it, but I know it's going to happen.
Won't get that satisfaction.
When I'm gone, they're going to be blaming you.
But you know who might get that satisfaction? Bradley, our producer.
Sure. So he'd be the one blaming you.
That's right. Yeah. Be around, they get mad at me for our inadequacies and failings. So for the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Thank you to our producer for his extraordinary work. Thank you, our audience, for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. And we'd like to hear your thoughts. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. What did you think of today's show? What have we not yet talked about that you'd like to hear us talk about? We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.